Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 1, lucky episode number 13, Sequencing and How to Build a Personalized Sequence. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a teensy favor, go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck so that you can follow along. Without further ado, let's jump in. So let's start with a bit of an agenda. Never mind, let's not. The 5 premise buckets of personalization that you can do with the prospect are the following. I think this is an exhaustive list, but full disclosure, if you come up with another personalized premise that you can think of on LinkedIn, shoot me a note because I would love to add it in. I have no pride of authorship. Speaking of authors, the first bucket of personalized premises that are going to be the most effective on your prospects is self-authored content. Now, the rule of all personalized premises is you have to think through a personalized premise that you can then link to your product or your value prop. So you don't want to do what's called the 10-80-10 rule, where essentially you do 10% that's personalized, 80% that's not, and 10% that's personalized, because what it ends up sounding like is this. Hi, Becc. Reason for my outreach is I noticed that you have blue hair. We over here at Drift help convert website views into close-won business. How about time Wednesday at 2 to unpack that message? It just sounds a little bit disingenuous and the hook can't really happen effectively. So our prospects more than ever are looking for us to know them. And if we do know them, we're going to see that primarily in the second line where you hook that relevance to that personalization. So if you want to know how to hook personalization to relevance, go to season 2 and I have an episode there where I cover that. But for today's sake, let's just keep going on where you can put personalization into sequences. So first bucket with your highest trigger rate is going to be self-authored content. Anything that your prospect wrote, articles, posts, webinars, because primarily when someone's making a post or doing content like this, they're wondering, their biggest fear is that you're not getting value from it. So after this session, I'm going to walk around my house and I'm going to wonder if you guys thought this was relevant to you and if you had some great takeaways and your day is different because of this session. So whenever you're reaching out to your prospects and you are validating their work, it can be super strong from a deep psychological level. So this is the premise of which social media is predicated on. When someone makes a post on LinkedIn or someone makes a post on Facebook or someone puts something on Instagram, the first thing they want is engagement. They want people to like their post, to say comments, because it communicates to them that their perspective or their point of view is really, really valid and that other people find value in it. So whenever you say this back to your prospects of like, hey, reason for my outreach is I saw you wrote this article. One line that stood out to me was X. It really, from a deep level, communicates 2 things to your buyer. Number 1, that you know who they are, and so they're willing to roll the dice that you have something that's valuable to them. And number 2, that you found value in their work. The second bucket is going to be engaged content. So this is going to be any kind of content that your prospect engaged with, but didn't author themselves. So I put the 3 options here, things that they liked, shared, and commented on. Not quite as strong as the self-authored content, because if I had to guess, it's because in bucket 1, your prospect is a hero because they wrote it. And in bucket 2, who wrote it was the hero, not your prospect, because they just engaged with it, but still really strong. The third bucket is going to be self-identified traits. This is anything in their profile line, headline, or company line that they wrote about themselves. So the interesting thing is it's typically is in third person, because in the nascent stages of LinkedIn, when people were logging into the platform, back when it was originally created, they were viewing LinkedIn as a resume. They were viewing LinkedIn as a way to put their achievements online for a future employer to take a look. So whenever they logged into LinkedIn, and still today, when you set up a profile, one of the first things they ask you is to fill in your about section and your headline to give prospective buyers or people who review your profile a little bit of flavor of who you are. So typically, this is one of the buckets that is the most easy to personalize on, because most people have it in their profile. Even if they don't engage with content, even if they don't write articles or perform webinars on LinkedIn, they still will usually have something in the about section. Typically, it will focus on their specialties, things that they zero in on in their work, or sometimes it will talk really well about things that they were able to achieve. But these 3 that are listed here, headline being what is right underneath their photo, profile line being their about section, and then company line being underneath where the company they work at on their profile, oftentimes people, instead of talking about the company, will talk about their work there. So this is a good low-hanging fruit if you want to personalize really quickly. Typically, I'm finding a personalized premise 80 to 85% of the time in these first 3 buckets. That's where you really want to aim, because these are the buckets where you're going to see the most conversion. But if you can't find something that they authored, and you can't find something they engage with, and you can't find something within the traits that they listed about themselves that you can link back to your value prop, then I would go with bucket number 4. Bucket number 4 is going to be what I affectionately call the junk drawer. Now, what's the junk drawer? The junk drawer is going to be things that your prospect has done, that don't relate back to their work life. So schools attended, personal interests, hobbies, recommendations, and skill endorsements are a part of that. Those do relate a little bit to work, but they're a little bit lighter in nature. But effectively, the junk drawer is anything about your prospect that's a little more fun and kind of niche. So some buyer personas love junk drawer premises, marketing, HR. Half of sales leaders love it. Half of sales leaders don't like it at all. SDR leaders really seem to like this. But it's basically anything about your prospect. But remember, the asterisk mark is you have to relate it back to your value prop. So whatever you pick, you need to pick something that you can see yourself tying to the wording of what you're going to say about your company or what your company does in the second line. So keep that in mind. If you can't find anything in the junk drawer, then the last bucket is going to be company level data and firmographic. So this is anything from M&A, merger and acquisition, post blogs, website language, or hiring. But these are basically premises that are about that person's company. So because it's going to be about the company and not about the actual person, this is going to be the least trigger rate bucket, because it matters to me what happens to my company, but it matters to me more what happens to me. So buckets 1 through 4 is where you're going to see the lion's share of your conversion. So I would focus in there if you can. If you're going to go into company level data, I would go into some detail in specific about the company and not just say something generic like my company's growing. Yeah, I notice your company's growing, because that could be a template and people won't know that you took the time to write it to them. So I would include some detail that really nails it home to your prospect that you know who their company is. So instead of saying, I notice your company's growing, say, I notice your company's grown 38% over the last 6 months and just added a director of sales enablement and new CRO. One message, I'm not sure if you know me. One, I'm positive that it was just to me. So now that we know the personalized premises, where the poop do we put them? When I first started doing personalization, it was one thing to understand what to personalize on, but the 2 questions that I knew that people were going to ask me is, number 1, how do I maintain consistency among my reps? If you want to see more on that, go to core session 4, which is personalization at scale, of how you can maintain consistency within the message. But the second question, and more dangerous question, is how do I scale it? How do I send messages out that, in a good amount of quantity? How do I make cold calls in a good amount of quantity? And how do I make sure that my reps don't over-research? Cold calling's tough, and sometimes we hide behind research because we're scared to make a dial. So I partnered with Outreach and dug deep into their platform, and they came up with the following option very quickly that is has been super successful for me within my teams. So if you're using Outreach as a sales engagement platform, this will be hyper relevant to you. I'm going to go into it for 2 slides. But basically, you can go into the custom tags in Outreach and you can hit edit. And there are 35 custom tags by default where you can put any kind of information that you would like your reps to collect that will then be sourced and housed on the prospect view. If you call Outreach or talk to your CSM, they actually can expand those custom tags to 50. So I would suggest doing so, because I want to systematize very quickly for my reps. Here's all the places where you can put all these personalized premises so that whenever they come into these custom tags, it's not just a big open notes field, but it's like, here's the LinkedIn article, place where you put the LinkedIn article summary and the LinkedIn article excerpt, so that my reps can get very, very quickly whenever they're systematizing things. So one of the strengths of having a system is that you can do something very, very repeatably, because the brain loves and gravitates towards structure. So if you put these custom tags in there, even though everything seems like art within sales, There's a lion's share of it is science, and then you've got the je ne sais quoi portion. But for today's sake, let's focus on the science portion. So you can put all the custom tags within Outreach on the prospect view. End to end, this entire process takes 7 minutes. I've done it for several different people that I know in the industry. Whenever they gave me their license, it took me 7 minutes to iron these in, and then they are kicked onto every single prospect that you have within your CRM and that are kicked into Outreach. One of the biggest fears, or one of the things that I had run into in the past when I first started doing this is, okay, they're sourcing this wonderful information and they're putting it into Google Sheets. So one of the strengths about using a tool like Outreach, or someone who can source this or store this information, is whenever my prospects would pick up the phone, for instance, my reps had done a lot of research, found out that they wrote this article or found out that they wrote this book. They had written it to a Google Sheet. They're dialing in Outreach, and then the prospect picks up. It surprises the rep because we only get 3 to 4 connects per day. And all of a sudden, instead of having the premise in front of them, they would start to shuffle. Where is that Google Sheet? Where is the premise that I picked? And so you would hear this awkward pause on the phone of like, hey, reason for my outreach is I saw you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you're talking about scaling effective teams. So you want to, first of all, nip that in the bud by building this into custom tags. Because whenever I call my prospect, more than once, when my prospect finally picks up, I want it front and center. If you're watching this in sales, I'm going to ask you the following question. I want you to answer for yourself at home, or you can answer out loud if you'd like to. Have you ever called a prospect and they didn't pick up on the first call? If so, this slide is going to be for you. I wanted my SDRs to be researching just one time. I didn't want them to spend time to reinvent the wheel over and over and over behind every dial. So with this kind of system, once you build the custom tags in, when I'm calling, I'm using my buddy Scott Barker over at Outreach, for instance. I went to his profile and I said, okay, what is the stuff that Scott has done recently, and how can I tease out a summary? I picked out one of the things that he did was he self-authored a LinkedIn post the other day with the premise of seeing is believing, and his quote is but the key is that I had to see it first. I picked out both of those. I trimmed them and put them in the custom tags of self-authored LinkedIn post excerpt and engaged content shared author post and premise. And then I hit save so that every single time that I call Scott, this is going to billow to the top. So the great thing about Outreach is whenever you put something in a custom tags field, it only pushes to the top the fields that you have filled in. So it doesn't have all 50 premises with blank boxes. It only surfaces to the top the fields that you filled in with your meaty LinkedIn personalized premises. So I usually, at the first step, go to LinkedIn and source these premises, and we'll go into a little bit of how that works into the sequences later. But I hit save, and then every time I call Scott, whether that's the first time or the 900th time, whenever he picks up, and it surprises me a little bit and my heart starts racing, I've got the personalized premise sitting here, right here in Outreach, that I can use it. One thing that I've done with my reps, you guys might think I'm crazy if you're watching this. I hope you don't. I want to require, not request, quality. Our prospects want more from us than ever, and they have the right to that. And so I want to make sure that my reps, every single time that they're dialing my prospect, it's tough to find personalized premises and go through the cerebral math of like how I'm going to relate this to my value prop. It's the right thing to do, and it will cause you amazing results, or at least in my experience with my last 3 companies. However, it's a little bit of a tough thing to do. So it's like no one likes putting spacers in their teeth to get braces and then having braces on for 2 years, but their teeth and their smile at the end is worth it. So you want to make sure that your reps put spacers in their teeth, so to speak, by requiring, not just requesting, quality. There is a way within Outreach that basically, if you don't have one of those custom tags filled in, if you haven't done your research on your prospect, then you cannot dial that person. So within Outreach, there is a way, if you call your CSM and ask for the Becc Holland special, there is a way that essentially you can opt your prospects out from your reps, and they cannot call them until they fill in some of these fields. So you have the accountability measure of knowing that your reps are prospecting before they're reaching out, or they're personalizing before they're reaching out. Here is an exhaustive list of all of the sequences that I build within Outreach for every company that I have been a part of. So we have two buckets here of scenarios. We have postbound premises and we have scenarios, and then we have premises that you should mention and then premises that you shouldn't mention. So let's start with bucket one. Bucket one is the sequences that I have built where you would mention the premise. So this is content downloads, event attendees, webinar registrants, some of the usual suspects. But then there's some other sequences in here. I don't know if you've downloaded the deck. I would suggest doing so. You can look through measures 5 through 9 that are a little ad hoc sequences that I haven't seen used too often. But these sequences all are built to deliver to your SDRs the who and the what premise, and make sure that you're making most out of every single person that comes from marketing and every single player scenario that you could likely turn up business. So it's bucket number one. I would mention the premise like, hi Scott, reason for my outreach is I noticed that you download or that you watched personalizing within sequences. But more importantly, I saw that you wrote this article on LinkedIn. So bucket number one, you mentioned the transition, and we'll talk about a little bit more about the script that I just said in a couple of slides. But bucket number one, I would mention the premise of the sequence. And bucket number two, I would still sequence these people. They're very, very valuable, but I wouldn't mention the premise of why I'm reaching out. So a couple of great examples are people who have viewed your website, or firmographic triggers like they just raised company funding. There's nothing worse than getting an email from someone who says, I noticed that you just raised a lot of money. Do you want to talk to buy my stuff? Because I sell stuff for money. So you want to, of course, company funding is a trigger that makes it very, very likely that they're in market and that they're going to be looking for tools to help expand their team and scale up their operations. But we want to be polite enough, cognizant enough, and self-aware enough to realize that that's not the real reason why they should buy. The real reason why they should buy is because we know who they are, and based on their career, based on their based on something that they've done, said, etc., triggered you to want to do outreach. So one of the hardest things to do is to come up for a reason for outreach. So these over here in bucket number two, we'll go into a little bit on how you can personalize with them. But bucket number two, I wouldn't mention the sequence scenario to your prospect. Bucket number one, I would. And the difference between the white and the blue in your deck is the blue ones are sent over by marketing. So you've got content downloads, event attendees, webinar registrants, high value MQL, website views in dark funnel with G2, 6sense, or Bombora. And the rest of these sequences in white are outbound sequences that you'll have to build yourself, but marketing won't supply the leads. So how do you pair them together? So with bucket number one, let's go back to this. Bucket number one, if you have a premise, content downloads, event attendee, webinar registrants, and you're going to mention it, then bucket number one is for you. So I should say, hey, Scott, the reason for my outreach is I noticed that you downloaded this content on selling effectively to the C-suite, but more importantly, and you want to do a personalized premise summary. Reason being, I want you to think through the mental math that if I were to send you a mass blast email after you watch this session and said, hi blank, whatever your name is, hi Scott, thanks for watching this session on personalizing within sequences. Do you want to buy my stuff? Most people don't respond to those types of emails. So think through when you've ever gone to an event in the past and then gotten a follow-up email from a company that you stopped at their booth. Very, very low conversion. And if I had to guess why, it's because they don't really know you. All they know is that you dropped by their booth, but they're trying to make it personable. So within these kind of leads, if they did download your content, they did attend a webinar, they did attend an event, you do want to mention that, but you want to transition with, but more importantly, because the more important thing is not your great content. The more important thing is not a webinar that you put on that was awesome. The more important thing is not this event that you put on that you put a lot of money into. The more important thing is them. The more important thing is anything that they've done, said, etc., that pulls you in. If you're in sales, you are now a professional person that wants to talk about your prospects. You want to know all about them, their information, their pains, their wants, their dreams, their desires, and what's holding them back. And then back of the bar napkin math, how your product might be able to be a fit to do something more effectively. But the key here is that instead of making the content the hero, instead of making the webinar the hero, instead of making the event the hero, you transition with, but more importantly, and then you talk all about them in terms of a personalized premise summary. So you want to mention something like, saw that you wrote this article on LinkedIn about scaling teams effectively. I wouldn't put one line in specific because you want to make sure that you're not too lengthy in this intro line. It's not a Charles Dickens novels. You're not paid per word, so you need to sum it up and TLDR it and slug line it for your prospects so that they can get on to the second line. If you don't have a postbound premise, so this would be bucket number two in specific. So again, bucket number 2 is all of the sequences that you're building where it makes the prospect important to you, but it's not necessarily something you want to mention. So again, something like website views. It's a little intrusive if someone viewed your website and then all of a sudden you're sending them an email about it. So in bucket number 2, and you've got anything from website views to dark funnel to IPO email opens to cold outbound, in this bucket, you're going to need to personalize again and lean on that personalization solely within your email. So in bucket number 2, you want to give them a personalized premise summary of, hi, Scott, the reason for my outreach is I noticed that you wrote this article on LinkedIn about scaling teams effectively. One line in specific that stood out to me was X. You need to give some kind of excerpt to your prospect. You need to make them drill home the point that you notice who they are, that you're not just giving this title of an article that they wrote on LinkedIn to get their attention, but there is one piece that really drilled home for you. So a great example is, some people reach out to me to prospect into me and they're like, love the Flip the Script series. And that's the only line that they've got, and they try to sell into me. And through conversation, I noticed that some of the people prospecting into me, that they actually hadn't seen any of the content series. A little hurtful to me, number one. But number 2, if you strike up a conversation with someone about something that they did, you want to have a little bit of backing about what the article is about. Otherwise, you come off as a little sleazy and disingenuine. No offense to anyone who's done this to me. I love everyone the same. But you want to have some kind of detail, some kind of fact about their work that really drills home to them that their articles that you've written, their body of work, and most importantly, that you value their body of work. So here is an example of a sequence that I built. This one is for cold outbound, and I want you to think of these sequences in terms of shell sequences. These are essentially pieces of structure within your sales engagement vendor that will give your reps the infrastructure of who they should be reaching out to and when they should be reaching out, and make sure they're on a sequence of actions and what kind of medium and action they should be doing and when, but then leaving it up to them to put some of the personalization in. So you want to marry the art or the balance of art and science. So my reps in the past, I have built shell sequences when I first started doing personalization, where I basically said, here are the 5 emails, and I left the template blank. Something that my reps struggled with whenever I was doing that, because I hadn't figured it out, simply hadn't figured it out yet, was they struggled with, okay, I know that this template is here and that I should email someone, but it feels a little crippling and like I'm reinventing the wheel if I don't have any text in there at all. So something that I did that really helped with them is I started putting a little bit of a shell of what the email should look like and giving them a place to start, and then having them fill in personalization and hooking it to the relevance and sticking the landing in the CTA. So just a quick tip for those out there, that basically have created these shell sequences, that I would put a little bit of the infrastructure of things that you commonly say. You don't have to do snippets necessarily, because those are always based on buyer persona, but you want to basically say, even if you lead with something as simple as, the reason for my outreach is ... Put a comment goes here, dynamic tag within outreach, so that you make sure you don't send that email out accidentally without the personalization. But you want to give a couple of lines for your reps so you can help speed them up, structure the email, but still allow for them to be human, to be personal, and to be super creative within the email. So let's talk about the sequence. The sequence that I do for every single scenario or postbound premise, whether that's content downloads, webinar registrants, event attendees, etc., The sequence, infrastructure of the sequence is always the same. I do 16 steps over 21 business days, more aggressive on the back end in terms of how quickly I'm reaching out, and more light on the front end. There's a LinkedIn research at the first step of the sequence to where people are going to the LinkedIn profile of their prospect, hunting 3 personalized premises that will fuel the rest of their sequence, hitting save and outreach, and then getting ready to rip some dials to them. There are 5 emails in total. There are 10 cold calls and 1 LinkedIn research step, bringing us up to 16. And I will go through a little bit of the infrastructure of this sequence. There are 5 different pods is what I want you to think about it in terms of. Every single pod has a cold email and 2 cold calls. A cold email on a day, a cold call the same day, and a cold call the next day. The first pod is going to start on day 1. So they're going to do a LinkedIn research step. They're going to hunt their 3 personalized premises of articles that person has wrote or content that person is engaged with, and they're going to hit save within outreach. And then that same day, day 1, they're going to write a cold email using that personalization. They're going to call on that same day, and then they're going to call the next day. So it's 1, 1, 2. That is pod 1. The second pod, there is a 6-day delta from pod 1 to pod 2 in terms of business days. So you want to be a little lighter in the beginning so that they get to know you and that you're the person who showed up knowing who they are. So you're different than 99.9% of all the other reps out there. And the second pod is going to start on day 889. And basically it's going to be cold email, cold call, cold call. If you want to know more about the text of these emails, if you go to the session on follow-up emails, and I dive into that pretty significantly on the text and the infrastructure of those within season 1. But the second pod is going to be cold email, cold call on day 889. So it's email, cold call. Same infrastructure as pod 1. Pod 3 is going to start on day 13 and go 13, 13, 14. Cold email, cold call. The fourth pod is going to start on day 18, which is a 4-day delta. So now we're speeding up. Day 18, 18, 19, cold email, cold call. And then the fifth pod is going to be immediate. So it's going to be day 19, 20, 21, 21 with cold call with voicemail, and then a cold email. So basically every pod has 3 steps, a cold email and 2 cold calls. You're going to get more aggressive in the back end, because the theory is in the beginning that people were basically being very, very heavy with their outreach in the beginning, trying to get someone's time and then petering off over time, which teaches your prospects that if they just wait long enough, you will eventually go away. So you want to flip that on its head. You want to be easier in the beginning where you're talking about all about them, all about all of the amazing things that they've done in their career so that they get to know you as the person who's different and who really knows what their day-to-day is. And then near the end of the sequence, you want to get more aggressive so that your prospects realize that you're not going anywhere and that you're consistently coming up with these personalized premises because you know who they are. So some of you might be sitting there at your computer saying, that's great, Becc, but what if my prospect gets pissed off? The following statement is for you. At least in my experience, whenever you are very, very aggressive, your prospects can get very irritated unless you have a personalized premise. Having a personalized premise and also being aggressive, in my experience, at least with my past 3 and 4 teams, the prospect actually respects the hustle and says like, oh my gosh, okay, you really know who I am. But if you aren't personalizing, then usually your prospect, that's when they're going to get mad and say, please stop calling me, unsubscribe, you're spam, and go to LinkedIn and give you some nasty message and tag you in it. Here is an example of email 1. So again, I hope you download the deck so you can see a little bit of the text. But like I said earlier, you're going to have the infrastructure of the message, and then you're going to have a lot of blanks to where you can basically fill in the message. So I write a shell email, looks almost like a full email, where I have the personalization up here at the top, and then in this middle line, they're hooking really effectively. Email 2 is a reply email. I actually don't personalize in there at all. This is an Agoji email that Outreach gave me called the Agoji email, where you reply to the first email, say any thoughts, and tag in some content. Sounds crazy, works really well. Email number 3 is going to be a mirror to the structure of email number 1, with the same type of structure, personalization, and tying it to relevance and sticking the landing in the CTA. However, it's going to have different wording because you don't want your prospects to think they got the same email twice. But there's no mention in this email that you have ever prospected them before. You don't want to remind someone that they've broken up with you. Email 4 is a reply email to email 3, basically taking accountability for the email not working, and then asking for the permission to pitch again and going into your third personalized premise. So again, you're personalizing in emails 1, personalizing in email 3, and personalizing in email 4. For more on this, go to the follow-up email session. I go a little bit deeper in terms of the structure, but you get the idea of how to do this within scale, within sequences. And then email 5 is the final email and the breakup email. And this is basically the swan song email where that is mostly templatized, but you have one little piece at the beginning when it says given your blank, where you should include some level of personalization of what you use in emails 1, 3, or 4. So you can read the text, but it says, wanted to reach out one more time and just make sure I haven't overstepped my bounds. Given your article that you wrote on LinkedIn, I originally thought it made sense to reach out. So we have a snippet of personalization, but the lion's share of the email is unpersonalized. So this email actually has a 18 to 20% response rate in my experience, and is one of the most effective templates that I've ever experienced within doing cold outreach with my teams. And I always leave a piece of content at the bottom for them. So in summary, I know that personalization seems like this untamed beast, and it seems like something that's really, really difficult to master. But given some kind of structure, then you can always make it easy on your reps to personalize and also personalize within scale. So that's it, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this session and want to see more like this, go to flipthescript.co and you can see a bunch of different sales topics that I cover. And if you really like this, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and give us a follow. But either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day.